In 1987, London's affluent Knightsbridge area was the scene of an armed raid so spectacular it entered the criminal record books as one of the biggest heists of the century.
No other robbery in this country has come close to it.
It was a colossal job.
A staggering £40 million worth of valuables were stolen when a ruthless Italian robber smashed his way into hundreds of safety deposit boxes,
making it Britain's biggest robbery.
The Italian playboy, the Italian, he was playing around with the girls. He liked the flash cars.
Make sure everything runs smoothly.
The plan was cunning and its execution fearless. So how did he do it? This is the incredible story of the Knightsbridge safety deposit box raid. Security Deposits plc, located in one of London's wealthiest areas, was a safe haven for the very rich.
Knightsbridge is a hugely expensive area. A lot of foreigners live in the service flats around that area. Harrods dominates the street because it's one of the most expensive department stores in the world. Lots of foreign tourists there. Always a very busy area, expensive cafes, nice restaurants, very fashionable streets. There could be an awful lot of money, jewellery, stocks and shares, all sorts of things deposited there. So if you lived in the area and you had a safe deposit box, that's the sort of place you would go to keep your valuables.
The best in Britain. That's how the owners described the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Centre when the doors were opened for the first time just 4 years.
Located in a district where the fabulously wealthy lived, worked and played, Security Deposits had customers on its doorstep and from around the world. They came to store their treasures in one of the 4,000 boxes housed in a solid vault at its centre.
You go into the front entrance and there you have a reception, the manager and his staff, and you want a box, you give details. People were keeping monies for whatever reason, documents for whatever reasons, jewellery for whatever reasons, even drugs and firearms for whatever reasons in deposit boxes. And the rental per annum is not a lot of money.
Sunday, the 12th of July, 1987. Parvez Latif, the owner and manager of Security Deposits, was waiting for 2 potential clients to arrive.
They had appointment as prospective customers who were dressed as respectable businessmen, had an appointment with Parvez Latif, the manager. He let them in. They then went downstairs into the vault area.
As Latif was showing the men the facilities, the mood suddenly changed when one of them pulled a gun.
When someone is forced to do something by another person and through fear they will cooperate. He's now under control.
With a gun to his back, Latif was forced into the security control room.
The manager, Latif, took them down there. Viche was then able to get into the control room. He grabbed the guard there. The guard couldn't press an alarm, which was an internal alarm anyway. He locked them away in the ante-room, handcuffed them. He now had control down there.
Their terrifying ordeal was about to get much worse.
He went back upstairs, and then he waited for the other guard and just held him at gunpoint. The guards were petrified. You've been manhandled and you've had firearms in your face.
The gang of armed robbers, led by a man called Valerio Viche, had overcome the owner and 2 security guards in a matter of minutes. They were locked in a separate room. The fortress, holding millions of pounds worth of valuables, was now at the mercy of the robbers.
Viche was in control. He was quite very determined. He knew what he wanted, what he was going to do. He knew he was limited on the time.
And time was now a crucial factor. Regular customers could enter the premises at any moment and disrupt the gang's plan. But Viche was a step ahead. An accomplice was posted in front of the building, waiting for his cue.
Locked the front door, put a notice on that they regret apologies because there was either building work or whatever was being done. They now controlled the building.
The deposit box center was now secured. Thousands of boxes holding cash and valuables lay inside. With everyone in position, the gang sealed the center and put their plan into action. The security deposit boxes were housed in a solid steel vault in the building's basement. There were 4,000 boxes in the room, but only 800 were in use, holding anything from deeds and bonds to cash and jewelry.
He knew he was limited on the time. He had an hour and a half to break open the boxes. He's running to time.
The gang grabbed their final accomplice from outside and began their raid. They had to finish before the center supervisor came to check on the premises.
Was banging at the boxes, the other was right behind him. And then the other two were sweeping up. Rings and jewellery boxes. Yeah, they broke down everything they could. That's what the other two were there for, and sorting out. It was like a shuffling behind, and they would break up, bang, bang. Anything bulky, yeah, they'd get rid of.
Although the containers were made of thick steel, box after box was smashed open. Those that were in use had different colors on the locks, so the gang knew which to target. They wasted no time nabbing the contents.
They were then scooping up and putting the gear, sorting out the big boxes, so you're minimalising the packaging and just pouring in whatever you've got, jewellery, gold, Kruger hands, notes and everything, just pouring it into the big boss bags, take them out.
There could be an awful lot of money, jewellery, stocks and shares, all sorts of things deposited there.
As the villains ransacked the vault, the staff were forced to sit and listen to the chaos. The thieves worked tirelessly for over an hour, bagging up everything they could get their hands on. But time was running out. The center supervisor was due any minute.
He was ready to go. That's the professionalism of it. You see the films, don't you? You see the stories on the TV where they go, no, we've got to have one more, and he's trying to grab the last pound note, the last bit of jewellery, and then they drive off and he's left stranded. You know, that's just maybe film, the way films work. But no, this guy was professional. You know, you look, bang, you do as you're told, off we go, and that's it.
They must have realised that they couldn't really spend all night there. Other staff were going to turn up. People were going to want to put stuff in the safe deposits on Sunday night or on Monday morning.
The robbers lugged their bags of loot out of the vault. Then they made sure the last member of staff wouldn't cause them any grief.
He was ready for 5 o'clock for the guard to come in, who was going to lock the vault, and the time lock was going to be placed on. When the guard knocked on the back door to be allowed in, he then apprehended him at gunpoint as well and left.
The vault was a mess. The gang had been relentless in their raid, smashing their way through a box every 30 seconds. Now, as the staff sat helpless, the villains fled into the busy streets of London with no sign of the police.
Eventually, police were called. There was a horrendous scene of crime as such, because 121 boxes, deposit boxes, had been broken open. There was property throughout the vault, discarded property.
As the hunt got underway, Viche put the next stage of his plan into action. The team split up and he went off alone. Meanwhile, the police began the painstaking task of investigating the crime.
In a very minute way, steadily, basically foot by foot. And it took 8 days to examine the vault. What we did realise after some time, but it wasn't the sort of faces that we thought could be responsible.
These weren't the familiar suspects from any of the big London armed robbery gangs.
No information was coming from other police officers. No other information was coming from police informants.
Scotland Yard had little to go on, and Viche thought he was home and dry. For him, it had been a very good payday. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on Scotland Yard mounted. Figures leaked to the media about the size of the haul were rising fast,
£40 million.
but they still had few leads. One of the challenges for officers was tracing all the victims affected.
Your victims of crime have to be seen, in this case, 100 and whatever losers, so I want identification of property.
A problem for detectives is that some customers are unlikely to tell them what's missing or how much it's worth.
I've lost all my jewellery except for what I'm wearing today.
Of the 121 box holders, I think that we traced about 109. That leaves 12 box holders that you must wonder why they've not come forward.
Some owners never went to the police, so nobody has any idea what was in those boxes.
As the investigation continued, the scale of the robbery became apparent. It was quickly becoming Britain's largest ever heist.
The rumours began to swirl about the amount of money or the amount of material that might have gone.
Yesterday evening, shocked customers gathered outside the centre. Some had lost everything.
The amount began to mount. Police began to talk about £5 million.
More than £10 million in valuables.
So it just began to creep up. Once people realised what could be held in safe deposit boxes, there began a lot of speculation.
The true value of the raid may never be known.
As media interest in the investigation grew, Scotland Yard finally got a much-needed breakthrough.
We found a fingerprint in blood. Well, that's when it breaks, doesn't it? Bang.
The Metropolitan Police were in the midst of tackling one of the biggest robberies in British history. An audacious gang had ransacked an exclusive safety deposit box centre in Knightsbridge, fleeing with millions of pounds worth of loot. Pressure was building on Scotland Yard to catch the culprits. After a fingertip search of the crime scene, the police got their first breakthrough.
Turning point in the case is quite simple in itself, is that it was the fingerprint.
Officers may have had a fingerprint, but matching it to a suspect was a different matter. Meanwhile, efforts were concentrated on determining what had happened, with the help of the centre's owner, Parvez Latif.
Tag it, flag it, yeah, make sure it's absolutely recorded properly. Yeah, okay.
He bought the safe deposit company about a year earlier.
Latif's lifestyle as such was that he was using coke, he was in love with his girlfriend Pamela Seamarks, he wanted to marry her.
The police began looking into Latif's personal life, while he assisted them with their inquiries.
We even did a video construction with him involved in it, show us exactly what happened.
As officers built a profile of Latif and pieced together the robbery, vital information on the fingerprint finally came through.
Fingerprint comparisons were not automated. It had to be done by visual observation, and it took them weeks to go through a huge card index and a huge collection of fingerprints. Then the penny dropped. And they realised who they were looking for.
The fingerprint was then sent to New Scotland Yard, where it was eventually identified as belonging to Valerio Viche. We were very fortunate that his fingerprints were in the indexes there. They'd been sent over by the Italian authorities in 1986 because they wanted Viche for major crimes in Italy. They believed he was in England. These people that you're dealing with are top class.
Idea, Leach?
We had no idea who it was.
Valerio Viche was a rather unique criminal. Flash, brash, and with good looks to boot. He had Italian charm, charisma, and a playboy lifestyle. He liked beautiful women, fast cars, and money in his pocket. Lots of money.
He had obviously quite a bit of money from the robberies because he lived a very good life and was quite a high roller, which means he must have made a lot of money.
It wasn't just them. I mean, the money helped because he wanted a playboy lifestyle. But it wasn't his main motivation. His main motivation was he got such a kick out of it.
wall-to-wall women, cocaine and cars. And that sums him up. And there are lots of people who have been tremendous characters, very powerful, very clever, very ruthless. Viche was something slightly different to all of that, something rather extravagant. Viche was a jack-the-lad in a big way. I can't think of a criminal quite like him in any of the other cases that I've done.
Viche was no stranger to luxury. He came from a privileged background in Italy.
His father was a libel lawyer and his mother ran a boutique. He went to university. I mean, he was well educated.
But his respectable upbringing had done nothing to curb his thirst for crime. Viche may have been unknown to the British authorities, but his face was very familiar to Italian police. Detective Inspector Leach discovered that Valerio Viche was an accomplished thief, wanted in his home country for over 50 robberies, all by the age of 32.
They knew him very well there. And he got away with blue murder. And even when he was arrested for different offences, the system in Italy is very, I wouldn't say bizarre, but we had a job understanding it, but there's so many bail proceedings. He was just arrogant, and he's in their face all the time.
He was the number one, he was the top of his profession, and that's the world they live in.
The police had a job on their hands. A ruthless Italian playboy was their number one suspect, and he was a slippery customer. D.I. Leach set to work finding out more about this elusive character.
High class, high quality. He's got the briefcase, Louis Vuitton, whatever it is, Rolex watch and so on. You know, he knows his way around, you know, that's his lifestyle.
Viche was arrogant, he was extrovert, great womanizer.
As they built a profile of their suspect, officers realized they were dealing with a chancer who'd already had more than a few close scrapes with the law.
The Italian police tracked him down to London and asked Scotland Yard to arrest him. 2 officers stopped his car, not knowing very much about his background. And Viche said, "Oh, I'd better just turn off my car telephone." Got out the other side and ran off down the street and disappeared again. He's very, very ready for the chase, ready to get away. Very alert, quick thinking.
Viche was used to giving the police the slip.
Because we didn't find him at all, we found everybody else because he was in and out of the country. And that's where, again, your manpower comes into it because you now need surveillance teams, surveillance equipment, things to focus on addresses and so on. We then went to work on those associates, not knowing whether they were involved in the crime or not. And all their vehicles and whatever details we had about them, where they were working. And then you get the breaks.
Surveillance flagged up some interesting characters associated with Viche. Eric Rubin, known to the police with previous minor convictions. Stephen Mann, a wild card, no criminal background, but closely linked to Viche. Peter O'Donoghue, mixed in the same social circles as the Italian charmer. David Poole, not only linked to Viche, but also seen frequenting certain places of interest to the police. And Israel Pincus, who officers were keeping an eye on, and who would inadvertently lead them to their next major breakthrough.
Pincus's car was identified as being at White's Hotel. He got a parking ticket, because we'd put that on the computer.
Nobody had a fixed address for Viche, but they knew of his associates, and the police began to look at the associates, the people around him, and that led them slowly towards where he might be.
All the suspects, all the people that Italy had said, look, he knows Viche as associate of O'Donoghue, Paul and Pincus. We started working on them, found out where they were living or their movements.
And these inquiries paid off. Just weeks into the investigation, the flying squad got their next lead.
The surveillance teams had looked at a Ferrari Testarossa. This was the vehicle that Viche was using. It then figured, then we seen Pincus's car, then you see the Ferrari. Then it linked it up.
London, 1987. Scotland Yard had one of the biggest robberies in criminal history on its hands. An Italian career criminal had raided a vault of safety deposit boxes and fled with a wealth of valuables. As information poured in, the police realized the stolen loot was worth tens of millions of pounds. Yet almost a month after the robbery, their number one suspect, Valerio Viche, was still giving officers the slip. But how much longer could he elude them? The flying squad were now hot on his heels and had tracked him to a London hotel.
We actually found out that they'd been using whites.
Yes, it's Mr. Viche.
The day I spoke to the manager there, he said, well, Viche's been here today, he's gone, but he was meeting a Mr. Paul.
Officers were getting close to their number one suspect. By now, the value of goods stolen stood at a staggering £40 million, and Viche was the country's number one fugitive. All Detective Inspector Leach could do was pray he'd surface again. Then Leach got the call he'd been waiting for.
I went to New Scotland Yard to put things together, and then I got a phone call again saying, oh, Viche's just walked into White's Hotel.
Hello, could I speak to D.R. Leach, please?
I said, oh, he's just arrived, you know, so bang.
As soon as I can, thank you.
It was the turning point officers needed.
We knew Viche was the man. That was the first time we'd actually had a sighting of him.
He'd been staying at a hotel in West London, I think it was White's, and they began to watch that, and there he was with his big Ferrari, which he was about to export.
But just as Viche came within touching distance, he vanished again, speeding off through the capital in his sports car.
Viche was just coming out of the hotel and just got into the Ferrari and then drove off down the Bayswater Road towards Marble Arch.
The police weren't about to let him slip away. They gave chase.
At the end of the day, yeah, he's a big fish. You've got to catch him. And that's when we gave the order to take him out. The Ferrari was in traffic going towards the Marble Arch. It's a very difficult thing trying to take someone out of a car. He was blocked in. The traffic was building up, Bayswater. But you don't want to chase with a Ferrari Testarossa anywhere, do you? The order was given, and at the appropriate time, they pulled him out.
Got him, Gov. Valerio Viche, my name's Pete. From the flying squad.
Viche was a showman. He had two Ferraris, and the reason he was caught was because he was waiting to send his second and favourite Ferrari to Colombia, which is where he was going to go to. If he hadn't been so ridiculously vain and greedy, they would not have caught him. They rammed his car, which must have been a very painful moment for a man who stayed in Britain long enough to want to export this thing. It was an £84,000 Ferrari, I seem to remember. So, but they didn't have much choice. I mean, there's a guy who they knew was normally armed.
A quick search of Viche's precious vehicle revealed some clear signs that he had been living the life of Riley.
A lot of the stuff that was in his briefcase, in the car, he had a lot of that still with him. I mean, top-class jewellery.
The flying squad finally had their man, along with some incriminating evidence. Viche's fingerprint placed him firmly at the scene of the crime, and his track record proved he was a professional thief with a string of robberies to his name. But was he prepared to talk to the police?
Valerio Viche did not implicate anyone else in the robbery. It didn't mention any names. We found him with immense amount of property and so on, and it followed. He knew what was going to happen, so he took the blame on himself.
Viche claimed to be a one-man band, but the police knew there was more to the story.
The ball started rolling because then we had to then start hitting all the others because we now realised, you know, a lot of work had been done.
Officers wasted no time arresting Viche's associates. They'd put their necks on the line to pull off Viche's dream job, but didn't appear to be big-time players themselves. So what was their motive?
They got 100,000 each in the split, and the possibility of getting more later.
Do you know Mr. Eric Rubin at all?
As the flying squad grilled the other culprits, they quickly discovered Viche was one of a kind, an intelligent thief who'd effectively evaded justice for years. But how had he robbed the Knightsbridge security centre without raising any alarms?
It was clear that the robbers had to have known, for example, that the closed-circuit television wasn't functioning, that there would be very few staff around on a Sunday afternoon, that it was very easy to bring a car or a van up to the back to load stuff in, that there were no parking restrictions on Sunday afternoon then, I don't think, that CCTV didn't exist in the streets around then, which of course it didn't in the 1980s. So somebody had to have not only cased the place, I visited it and looked around, but also had a good idea of how the place worked.
Viche was claiming no one else was involved, but this kind of detail had to come from somewhere.
The fact that he'd been there a number of times, and then because their records weren't that good there, the video cameras didn't work. It was so slack there. It was possible that he had recognised the faults in the security there by just visiting. But we did suspect Latif, but no, it just seemed too big.
As suspicion surrounding Latif grew, one of Viche's associates, Stephen Mann, broke.
Stephen Mann was not a criminal in the true sense. Once he realised that, main man's arrested and so on, and he then just put his hands up.
So what is your relationship with Mr. Viche?
And he decided that he would give evidence for us against the others, particularly Viche.
Mann rolled over, telling the police what had happened after the robbery.
He went up to Brownlow Court, where the garage was at the rear of a block of flats, and he met Stephen Mann there. They then changed boxed up what they could and changed it into whatever, so it was manageable. Then went to a flat in North London.
As the revelations poured in, Mann alleged that there was more than just one member of the Viche family involved.
Stephen Mann said Viche's father was waiting for him. We didn't have any corroboration on that.
We were aware that the father was in this country, yes. And I do think there was a reference to the fact that the father had been at the flat that Viche was using.
As rumours circulated that Viche hadn't worked alone and had enjoyed his newfound wealth with his father, the police got a breakthrough with the centre owner, Latif, from one of Viche's other associates.
We went through Pincus's stuff. We found telephone bills from Israel to the centre.
Before his arrest, Viche had eluded the police and fled to Israel. But why would he have been calling the security centre?
That's when we realised that Latif was involved.
Scotland Yard was facing one of Britain's biggest heists ever. £40 million worth of valuables had been stolen by an Italian armed robber. After weeks of surveillance, officers had their #1 suspect, Valerio Viche, in custody. Viche was claiming no one else was involved, but his associates were telling a different tale. And the police were about to uncover exactly how the whole operation was possible.
So you arrested Latif. What he said to us was, well, it's a relief. I'm now going to tell you all about it. I want to cooperate. And basically, he was saying that Viche had forced him to do it. And that was going to be his defence.
The security centre owner, Parvez Latif, had lied. His alibi crumbled when police discovered Viche had been calling him regularly from abroad to check on the investigation.
Latif was a very good target. He'd reduced the cost of the premiums for customers and still couldn't get any business. At the time of the robbery, I think they had 800 boxes in use out of 4,000. Latif was getting desperate. He'd already lost £500,000. Although he came from a wealthy Pakistani family, he lived quite a flash life, which he had to sustain. Other people, I think, were scared of Viche, which might explain the power and the hold he had over people like Latif.
The business was not being run properly as such. It was going down the pan. He owed money. Viche had promised him a third of the proceeds.
To make matters worse, Latif was about to find out that it wasn't only his business Viche had stolen.
Viche had an affair with Latif's girlfriend.
That was all to do with his ego and a bit on the side as such. He could do it. He could prove that I could take her away from Latif. It was as easy as that. Yeah, he used her for a while. I don't think he was too bothered about her.
As the revelations continued, the elaborate details of Viche's plan finally came to light.
Knightsbridge was opportunist because he met Latif and he became the inside agent and he wined and dined him. You know, I'd say the modern expression now is he groomed him, you know.
Viche had his sights on the prize the moment he was told about the centre by a Russian acquaintance. Latif was just a pawn in his game. Viche was meticulous in his planning. He spent months meeting Latif, offering him bribes as a sweetener until he had him on side. Viche also rented his own box at the centre to gain entry and check out the security.
And this company, despite the fact where it was in the middle of Knightsbridge, a great temptation for rich people to put their stuff away safely, wasn't doing well. Enter Viche, who is swaggering. You can imagine how effective he would have been in dominating Latif. He persuaded Latif, I think, to put up his insurance premiums and put his own guns and money into the safe deposit box about 2 months before the actual robbery. So again, it was a good way of getting to look round the place. And Latif, very obligingly, didn't take down his name and address or ask for any proof of identity. Very dangerous thing to do in the circumstances.
These discrepancies allowed Viche free rein to plot his perfect crime. Day in, day out, he sat going over his plan in minute detail, covering every eventuality.
One mustn't lose sight of Viche. He planned. He planned his robberies. You would expect that. It took time, Knightsbridge, let alone to time it the way that he did time it, although it didn't work out for him exactly on the day. The vehicles that were bought, the different premises that were used.
They've looked at the place they're going to rob. They've seen how people go past it. They've watched the routines of people who work there. So they know that to a second the time that they've got.
But on the day, not everything went according to Viche's meticulous plan. The first mistake came when he tried to call the gang member posing as a security guard outside.
He was wandering around out the front. Tried to call him.
Lead it to 4, come in.
Wasn't paying attention. Let's say they didn't communicate.
Despite hours of planning, the fake guard had made a rookie error. The volume on his radio was turned down.
Viche couldn't believe it. Slapped him a few times. I wasn't listening to the radio.
And the mistakes didn't stop there. Before the raid could begin, Viche called for his final accomplice, also outside.
He wanted the van, and he couldn't get a response. He had to leave the vault. He goes out and then bumps into a uniformed police officer.
Viche could have been rumbled before he'd even begun, but he made a split-second decision.
You know, he just had to front it up, but, you know, other people might have panicked. They were so lackadaisical, you know, and casual about it, and that's why they made mistakes. By the time they got back, the police by then had disappeared because the police had been there for totally different reasons. That's your luck sometimes, you know.
But luck wasn't all on Viche's side. The police were about to learn exactly how his bloodstained fingerprint ended up in the vault.
the boxes. They did need banging, they really did need some hitting. Then you've got to pull them out, and that's why when they were rushing, that's why he cut his finger. Quite a deep cut.
If Viche had not cut his finger on the lock of one of the safe deposit boxes, he probably would have got away with it.
It was this simple error by Viche himself that eventually led the police straight to him. Officers also discovered how the gang had managed to smash open the steel security boxes.
You're presented with a box. If you haven't got a key, you've got to force it open. It's as easy as that. And he made a tool. They had to hit the lock in a certain way to break it in one. I mean, if you're spending, 5 minutes breaking one box, another 5 minutes, another. It's like the films. It's a dream, isn't it? You're in a deposit box and you've got hours, and you can just break them all open at willy-nilly and select what you want.
They may have managed to break open the boxes, but the gang's raid was flawed in many ways. Along with his own slip-ups, the crew Viche selected were also to blame for his downfall.
He playing what he thought was meticulous, but because it's up to the players on the day. And he knew that they were a liability, maybe. If they'd had their radios tuned in and they just were half awake, then he wouldn't have had the delays and so on.
Mr. Parvez Latif.
As well as their errors during the robbery, some of Viche's associates were quick to roll over once the police came knocking.
Everybody has to look after themselves. Viche looked after himself in certain respects. But that's what happens in these cases, where you have a number of defendants, suddenly dog eats dog.
As officers questioned suspects and built the case, the revelations kept coming.
4 days he spent sorting out all the gear, dividing up into whatever. The watches, the stones, and all the money went into the bath, which he says was about £1 million.
True to his playboy image, Viche spent days reveling in his newly acquired wealth. But he also slipped up once he had the goods in his possession.
We got a lot of property back. We found different deposit boxes with watches, stones, etc., etc. He's got his firearms back.
Despite his carelessness, he wasted no time cashing in his spoils, selling items around the world.
He was travelling in and out of Europe. He went to Switzerland to broker the deal for the diamonds. He then went to Antwerp, Belgium, and then he met people there that introduced him to the Israelis.
He obviously had travelled a lot, and he obviously knew the byways of Europe, where you could get rid of diamonds, places like Antwerp, where you could move money easily. And he'd been involved with the drug world then, and now is a very good way of transporting stuff and building up connections as well.
And this wasn't Viche's first job in the UK. He'd been a busy man since arriving on our shores just 18 months previously. Detectives discovered he was responsible for at least 5 other armed robberies in London, netting him over £250,000. These helped fund work on the Knightsbridge job. One raid had taken place at the illustrious Coutts Bank just months before.
And because they're dressed in motorcycle helmets, Viche's got his Beretta waving it around. All the customers sitting on the floor, hands up and so on, terrified. He got £26,000 out of that, and then he jumped on their motorbikes and off and away, He was spending a lot of money. He was using coke. He still had bills to pay. He was living in a hotel and womanising. He was a robber. He got a buzz out of it, couldn't stop doing it.
The main Knightsbridge trial was long and eventful. It took years to track certain gang members around the world. David Poole received 16 years for robbery. Peter O'Donoghue 11. Israel Pincus got 10 years for receiving stolen goods. As for the 2 informants, Stephen Mann received 5 years, whilst the centre owner, Parvez Latif, got 18 years. Ringleader Valerio Viche received 22 years for robbery and possessing a firearm. Eric Rubin fled to Israel but was eventually extradited and given 12 years in 1991. Despite Stephen Mann's allegations, Viche's father was never charged. Although Viche received a lengthy sentence, it did nothing to calm his cocky attitude.
He was reading the Guinness Book of Records, waiting for the jury to come back, just boning up on where he stood as far as the biggest heist was. Amazing.
He liked to be known as the one that had done it. He wasn't ashamed of the fact. He was very proud of the fact that he was an Italian who'd come across and done the biggest robbery of all time.
What I think is dangerous with someone like Viche is to glorify him, is to talk about him as a high, I use the expression highwayman, and I think it would be very dangerous to turn him into some sort of cult figure or a sort of mythical figure. He was a bank robber, or a robber certainly, an armed robber, quite good at what he did, ruthless, and he could well have killed people if he'd had to. And I think one should always bear that in mind when you see the gold chain and the big smile in the pictures.
With the main culprit and his accomplices in prison, the police investigation was a success. But of the estimated £40 million worth of goods stolen, only a fraction was ever recovered.
9 people are being questioned by police in London investigating last month's raid on safe deposit boxes in Knightsbridge. They also say they found several £1 million worth of cash, silver and jewellery.
We know what we recovered, about £10 million worth of property.
30 of the owners never went to the police, so nobody has any idea what was in those boxes.
We also know that there was 24 to 26 kilos of scrap gold that went into Hatton Garden and was melted down. Now, that scrap gold consisted of the bangles and chains and so on that the original jewellery had been in.
It was a suggestion that, in fact, Viche and his friends had robbed other members of the underworld. So it's quite possible that the Knightsbridge safe deposit boxes also held some of the secrets of the underworld as well.
As for the rest of the loot...
He never did say what had happened to it. He said it was in a safe place, but that was it. It was obviously not going to divulge where it was.
Despite being locked up in prison, Viche never stopped trying to make a name for himself.
He asked if he could write a book about his actual robbery.
Most criminals would not write books. I mean, it's their business, it's their livelihood. You don't give away your trade secrets to the other side. Viche couldn't care less.
I said to him, well, you know, why the Knightsbridge job? And he said, well, he wanted to be known as the one who'd done the biggest robbery in history. And that was his main motivation for it. The money obviously was part of it, but his main kick in life was that he was going to be the #1 criminal in the world.
After writing a book on his crimes while in prison, Viche was eventually sent back to Italy in 1992 to serve the remainder of his sentence. 8 years later, his life of crime came to an untimely end. He was just 45 years old.
And then, of course, eventually ended up in Pescara, and then he was getting parole, weekend leave, and of course then he couldn't leave it alone. He got involved with another couple of guys in a car in the mountains up near where he was living at the time.
2 Italian traffic policemen came up, saw the car, were suspicious and stopped them. There was an exchange of gunfire. Viche seriously wounded one of the policemen and then walked over to kill him. And the policeman shot him back, got there first with a submachine gun and hit him 12 times. Why not just run? Why not just walk away? Why not escape? But to go over and just calmly plan to shoot him is quite cold-blooded, quite... Again, it's all part of this sort of image that he cultivated. If Viche hadn't decided to be so cold-blooded and come over and kill the policeman, he could easily have got away and survived that. The twist for Viche is here's the man who committed one of the world's biggest robberies, and certainly one of the biggest robberies ever committed in Britain, dies at the hands of a wounded policeman in the Italian countryside, hardly recognised or known. In fact, after he was killed, it took the police some time to work out who he was, which must have really galled him.
And that was the end of him. Bye-bye, Valerio.
In February 2006, Tunbridge in Kent became the scene of Britain's largest ever cash robbery.
They've terrorised 14 members of staff.
They are heavily armed. They've seized all the staff. They herd them into one room, make them lie on their fronts, and then start to restrain them with cable ties.
Before doing this, they had kidnapped a family, including a young child.
The worst night of my life, the depot manager's account of his terrifying ordeal.
In a highly organised attack, the callous gang terrorised their victims for hours.
Don't look at me! Stay there! Don't loot!
I was there that night, and I know the intensity they came in with to take that money.
The gang stole a record £53 million in cash before fleeing into the night. This is the dramatic story of the Securitas heist. The 21st of February 2006, the Securitas depot in Tunbridge, Kent. Staff were partway through the evening shift, sorting money.
Business works very, very fast nowadays, and they need to get rid of the cash they've taken within their businesses, and they need to be resupplied. And this is the business that this cash house is involved in. It's basically the counting of money that's taken by banks, building societies, and other commercial businesses, crediting that to their accounts, and also examining those notes to see which ones are worthy to go back out on the street or which need to be returned to the Bank of England.
The depot worked around the clock, processing huge amounts of cash.
Sitting in the vault, you would have around £200 million. It came in from large organisations that took large amounts of money.
Shift manager Alan Thomas and his night team were sorting through the piles of cash, little knowing that the next hour would change their lives.
It was a perfectly normal night. Main job at night was to process the notes and then bag it up. Things changed about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was at my desk. That's when I saw Colin from where the main entrance was walking down with what I thought were policemen.
Seeing a police officer, they were duped into believing that there was a problem. Seeing their manager, who was standing there, they didn't know what had happened.
It was very unusual for Alan's boss, Colin, to come back to the depot so late.
I'd never seen Colin in at that time of night before. He just came in, he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Alan." And I thought, what's he sorry for?
Alan's confusion quickly turned to terror.
But then one of the guys who were with him, who I thought were policemen, pointed a gun in my face and started screaming at me to get down, get down.
Don't look up.
And I knew it wasn't a normal night.
Don't look at my face and stay where you are.
They got cable ties out and started tightening our hands together, and they tightened pretty tight. Only when you're lying down and they've tied you up and you've got time to think and you realise what's happening. He's standing there, you know, waving a gun at you, and you can't do anything about it. You start thinking, am I going to go home tonight?
The situation worsened as, unbeknownst to Alan, the rest of the gang entered the depot, holding the night team at gunpoint.
So they've seized all the staff, they herd them into one room, make them lie on their fronts, and then start to restrain them with cable ties. And some of these people are bound quite tightly. Put yourself in that position, you are bound, you are in a place that has a lot of money in it, you know what's in that, you have these people committing what is believed to be the impossible, they were terrified.
Within seconds, the Gang of Seven had entered the allegedly impenetrable depot. The building was protected by high steel fences, security cameras, airlock doors, and alarms. But the thieves had overcome all these. Now the staff feared for their lives. The gang had walked through the front door, pounced on staff sorting money in the deposit processing room, and dragged everyone to an area next to the vault. And these thugs clearly meant business.
They've got a Scorpion machine pistol, an AK-47 assault rifle, Remington pump-action shotgun, and at least one handgun. Added to that, they've got ballistic vests on, which tends to suggest they were prepared, maybe to experience a shootout. Otherwise, why wear a ballistic vest?
Held against their will, the staff had no choice but to comply.
And when they got everybody gathered, then they started asking who's got the keys to the vault.
The armed robbers had a specific plan. Although millions of pounds were counted outside the vault, this wasn't their target. They'd come for something much bigger. Adjacent to the customer deposit room where the cash was sorted was the depot's high security vault.
No one person could open it. Everybody only had one type of key, and you needed a top key holder and a bottom key holder to open it. When they were locked, like over the weekend and so forth, they were all on time locks. Real high-tech security. Once you opened the doors to the vault, you had more metal grills to go through as well. I thought it was, you know, somebody just answered to Fort Knox.
The company handled colossal sums of money, up to £250 million at a time. And now the gang had it in their sights. Keys to the vault were normally held by 2 members of staff, but just weeks earlier, Colin Dixon had given himself sole control.
I hope that they don't say to me, give me your key, because I'm going to have to say I haven't got it. Then they might think that you're playing them around. Lucky enough, Colin was able to go and get the keys. Then they opened the vault. We were all tied up just outside. You know, you could hear them going into the vault.
Rows of cages packed with bundles of notes lay before the gang. But as they were about to rush in, something stopped them in their tracks.
They realised that they couldn't get the money out without use of a forklift. So they had to ask for volunteers.
The money's stored in various ways, which I won't go into for security reasons, but some of it can be wheeled and some of it has to be lifted. So they force one of the members of staff to operate a handheld forklift truck. And they make him go into the vault, lift money up, and load it onto the back of the lorry. He does what he's told. He can see what's going on. His manager is clearly under duress. It's clear this nightmare is unfolding before his very eyes.
Waiting in one of the loading bays was a 7.5-ton lorry, reversed into place when the gang entered the building. Once the vault was open, the thieves wasted no time ransacking it.
They continue wheeling money that's in various cages onto the lorry. Most robberies last a matter of minutes. This was an hour and a quarter.
The staff member forced to help move the cages tried to throw a spanner in the works.
What he does, in fact, do is he loads it onto the lorry, but as the weight of the money makes the lorry go down, so it's making it very difficult for them to use this hydraulic forklift. And he knows this, but he doesn't tell them. It's a brave thing to do.
The lorry, in fact, then dropped under the weight, so they actually discarded that into the loading bay.
Millions of pounds were wheeled out of the depot as the staff lay helpless.
My hands were really comfortable. I got past the point of no return, really. You got 50-50 choice to make. You can say something, you know, they're either going to take notice of you and do something about it, or you can say nothing and, you know, knowing that once they've gone, you're going to be in considerable pain and you can't do anything about it. So I took the decision to say something.
The cable ties, they're too tight, loosen them.
I started shouting at them, you know, you can't leave my hands like this, you've got to sort my hands out.
But Alan's protest gave the gang another idea.
He cut me loose, and then he was going to re-tie me, but not as tight. And then the leader of the gang said, no, don't tie him up again, I've got a better idea. So he stood me up, and then he walked me from where I was standing around to a cage that we would store money in, and he told me to get into this cage.
They decide to lock all of the hostages within the cages that normally hold all the money. So they start to invite them to climb in initially. Those that can't climb in are physically lifted and put into the cages. The cages are then locked.
Staff had been bound for over an hour in crippling positions on the floor. Now, locked in cages, they had no means of escape.
They probably felt more claustrophobic than they were on the floor, because they were then really restricted with space.
They wheel all the cages together. The last thing you hear is one of the robbers shouting.
Comment for them, which clearly they thought was jokey, and these people were just absolutely terrified.
We just sat there for a little while, and someone started kicking at his cage. We thought, have they really gone? Have they really gone?
In 2006, a vicious armed gang infiltrated a security depot in Kent that held over £200 million in cash. Having tied up over a dozen staff, the robbers entered the vault and spent more than an hour raiding its contents with no alarm raised. Workers then faced an even more terrifying ordeal as the thieves locked them in cages.
It was pretty uncomfortable for one person, and some of them they put two in.
The hostages are now left in these cages. They don't know whether the robbers have gone, whether they're going to come back and shoot them or do anything else. They're still in a state of terror.
The gang was heavily armed and had used violence. Alan and his colleagues weren't taking any chances, staying put until they felt sure the coast was clear.
Someone started kicking at his cage, and when nobody came back, then we thought, oh, they must have gone. And then everybody started kicking and so forth at the cages. One of the girls actually had a key.
As the staff were freed, Alan rushed to raise the alarm.
So I hit a panic button. I dialed 999.
Police hurried to the depot.
Please.
Meanwhile, the gang fled into the night to count the spoils.
It's vital that you get as much information as you can out of the victims, which will enable you to secure evidence at a later date. So we had a team that went to the staff, and they were put in a separate room within the depot, and they were spoken to individually by officers. We had to take their outer clothing because of forensic opportunities at a later date. Secondly, you have to remember that this place is not open to the public, so generally most people don't know it exists. Most people have never been into this depot. So you need to familiarise yourself with your surroundings at any scene. And what I wanted to do, I was keen to get into the scene and have a look at the mountain that faced us all.
Detective Sergeant Andy Nichol was stunned by the scale of the robbery that had just taken place on his patch.
When I first arrived, I saw it was the on-call detective inspector who'd arrived first. I literally said to him, as much as £1 million. And he looked at me and said, more like 20. And I thought he was kidding. I then turned to somebody else and said, is he joking? £20 million? Are we talking about 20 million? And the chap said, I think you can double that. And then I knew straight away, within a minute of arriving, that we were into something that was unprecedented.
The police were faced with a heist already tipping the scale at over £40 million. Although the gang had fled with a record sum, they'd left around £150 million behind in the vault. Officers soon discovered this was not a textbook operation, as information from the night before began to emerge, starting with the boss, Colin Dixon.
The manager had left the depot to drive home, as he usually did on his normal route, back to his home address. Now, on the outskirts of Maidstone, he was travelling when he saw blue lights on a vehicle behind him, and he thought that it was a police vehicle.
He pulled over at the side of the road, and he was approached by a man dressed in full police uniform who asked him to step out of the car and come back to the police vehicle, what he believed was a police vehicle.
As the officer spoke to Colin, over 20 miles away in Kent, his wife was at the family home waiting for his return.
Colin's wife and his child, they were at home. In the evening, things had settled down. Colin's child was in bed. Lynn was waiting for him to come home.
As Colin's wife grew concerned about his whereabouts, events for him were taking a sinister turn.
Once in the police vehicle, the offender told him that he'd been stopped for speeding and then immediately applied handcuffs. And Colin Dixon was immediately suspicious. Sometime on that journey, they produced a 9mm pistol and threatened him with it, and he knew then, clearly this was not police officers, and he clearly understood that he was being kidnapped.
In Herne Bay, Colin's wife received an unexpected visit.
And then around 8:30, 8:45, there was a knock at the door. She opened the door to find two persons she believed to be policemen who told her that Colin had been involved in a crash and that he was in hospital. He was all right, but important for them to take her to him. She immediately put two and two together and thought, well, that's the reason he's late, as anybody would. She gathered together some possessions, went to get into the car, and her initial reaction was, there's cream leather seats in this car, and she realised there was a commercial radio station on. She realised something was wrong. Her child was already in the car that she was about to get into. She started to scream, and the door was shut.
Get in, Nick. Get in.
For both Lynn and Colin, things were about to get much worse.
Colin was taken to an isolated rural location, and he was transferred from that bogus police vehicle into a van, and his legs were tied together, and his glasses were taken from him, and his eyes were taped down.
Lynn Dixon and her child were conveyed to a farm, and clearly they had no idea where they were going.
The Dixons were all taken to the same location and left for hours in terrible conditions. The terrified family could do nothing but comply with the gang's demands.
It was a freezing cold night. It had been snowing. Colin's eyes were untaped. He was given back his glasses and told to look straight ahead and not around him. But he was clearly aware of men in balaclavas and other disguises around him, and he could clearly see firearms, what he described as machine guns and pistols. And he was interrogated about his place of work, where the alarms were. What he didn't know at that time was that his wife and child had been kidnapped as well. And at some point during that evening, they were brought to him. The persons responsible for this crime threatened to kill his wife and child.
A heist in Tunbridge, Kent had just entered the record books, surpassing any other cash robbery in the UK. In 75 minutes, 7 thieves had ransacked a Securitas depot, fleeing with over 5 tons of cash in excess of £50 million. Officers soon discovered that the depot manager, Colin Dixon, his wife and young child had been kidnapped at gunpoint prior to the raid and forced to reveal confidential information.
How much is in there?
Most people put themselves in that situation. Would you comply?
How many doors are there?
Of course you would.
You need a key to get in there. Then you come into the first office. Then there's a single door there.
When Colin had told the gang what they needed, they drove him to the depot. With his eyes taped and hands bound, he had no idea what was happening to his wife and child.
At 1:27, the Volvo pulls up outside of the depot. Just prior to this, the robbers had given Colin Dixon his glasses back, and they unbound his hands. To all intents and purposes, when they arrive at the depot, he's not bound in any way. He's looking normal.
The staff, having seen Colin there and with the police officer, obviously realising something is wrong. They were duped into believing that there was a problem. They went into the control room, and it was at that point that the police officer then produced a firearm. And immediately the person in the control room was subdued. At that stage, Colin was made to open the gates to allow the rest of the gang of robbers into the premises.
The thieves then set to work stealing 17 cages full of 10, 20 and 50-pound notes and loading 3 shopping trolleys full of cash. As the police studied the evidence further, they made another startling discovery.
As you watch the CCTV, you suddenly become aware of somebody else on the back of the lorry. And as they're filling up, you can see Lynn Dixon and her child come into view, but they kept on the lorry while they load it.
Once they'd loaded the money, Lynn Dixon was forcibly lifted into one of the cages along with her child.
Despite the trauma, the young child managed a remarkable act of bravery.
One of the cages containing Mrs. Dixon and her child is damaged. They managed to get her child out of the cage, and the child then assists another member of staff who has hidden keys on her to open the cages and free everybody.
Detective Chief Inspector Mick Judge and Detective Sergeant Andy Nichol soon discovered the extremes this gang was capable of. They were looking for ruthless kidnappers who wouldn't think twice about using violence. They began searching for clues at the depot and hunting for their first lead. They didn't have to wait long before a tip-off sparked their first line of inquiry.
What actually did come in very, very quickly was some information that a lady called Michelle Hogg had been involved in helping disguise some people.
The police believed the gang had used sophisticated makeup to disguise themselves during both kidnappings.
We knew that 3 men in total, posing as police officers, had been involved, and we knew that they hadn't attempted to cover their faces. But we also guessed that there must have been some way that they'd altered their appearance. We didn't know what prosthetics were, what they did, and how they were used. But in effect, it's a way of altering your appearance. It is not a complete mask, but it's a way you can alter skin colour, hair, nose, facial features, ethnicity.
We went to Michelle Hogg's house and we arrested her and took her into custody and commenced a search of her flat. Whilst doing that, we recovered various bits and pieces. We sealed her wheelie bin and took it with us. At the bottom of that was a black bin liner, and inside was a veritable Aladdin's cave to a detective. It had latex in it, it had hair in it, it had dyes in it, it had all sorts of theatrical makeup, which tend to suggest that we were on the right track.
As the contents of Michelle Hogg's bin were forensically examined, another breakthrough confirmed to Andy Nichol that they were closing in on the gang.
We have a report of an abandoned parcel force van at a pub very close to the A249, very close to where Colin Dixon was kidnapped. Within that, we found cardboard boxes, plastic wrappers, and paper towels.
As these items were sent to forensics, more information came in.
But at the same time, we also recovered 2 burnt-out vehicles.
These 2 vehicles are together. One of them's a Volvo, one of them's a Vectra. In the boot of the Volvo, which isn't burnt, we recover Colin Dixon's briefcase.
Within 72 hours of the robbery, Judge and Nichol already had a huge amount of evidence to go on. But more was yet to come.
We found the red LDV van and the Vauxhall Vectra had both been purchased using a false name, but had been registered to an address that had links to Stuart Royal. So we have a pointer towards our first suspect.
Royal was a second-hand car dealer from Maidstone. Previously unknown to Kent police, he was now closely linked to the biggest cash robbery in Britain. As officers were drawing in, they got another breakthrough.
On Friday, a white Ford Transit van was found in the car park of the Ashford International Hotel. That vehicle was found to contain around £1.3 million, a Scorpion machine pistol and a balaclava. We could be sure that the money found had come from the depot. There were markings on the wrappers which clearly showed that it had come from there. We made inquiries in relation to the ownership of that van, and that led us to Lee Rusher.
Rusher was from the Tunbridge area and already known to the police. Officers discovered he knew Stuart Royal and a third suspect they were interested in, Albanian Jetmir Butchpapa. He'd worked with Rusher in the past and was also familiar to the police. He had no history of armed robbery. As detectives closed in on the gang, more vital evidence came through.
We have a report from a member of the public that there's some cages have been dumped at a place called Frinningham Farm, and very close to the scene of the kidnapping of Colin Dixon. These are the cages that contained the money. They had property of the Bank of England actually on the cages, so it's a bit of a giveaway. Where they're actually dumped at Frinningham Farm is an area that is used to store vehicles. The person storing these vehicles and had links to Stuart Royal.
Further clues were unearthed at the farm.
During the search, we found £30,000 in the boot of a car, and that money from the labels on it had clearly come from the depot. A forensic search of that vehicle discovered a Red Bull can.
The drinks can was sent for DNA tests. Back at HQ, just 3 days into their inquiry, Kent police were getting very close to the culprits.
By the Friday, we really were looking at 4 key suspects. We had the names Lee Rusher, Jetmir Butchpapa. We were linked to Stuart Royal, and we also had the name Lee Murray.
Murray was a world-class kickboxer from southeast London. He wasn't known to Kent police. With the evidence mounting only days into the inquiry, detectives decided to visit some of their suspects.
The following morning, armed officers executed warrants at Lee Rusher's house and Jetmir Butchpapa's houses. Neither of the men were there. It became clearly apparent there was significant evidence within Lee Rusher's home address. We found in their receipts for prosthetic makeup. We found police stickers, which is something you would stick on the side of a car to make it look like a police car. We also found a piece of paper with a reference on it, and it was the grid of the Ordnance Survey which covered the Securitas depot. In his main bedroom, we found a sketch plan of the inside of the Securitas depot.
They're in this room here. Be quick!
Damning, damning evidence.
The suspects were nowhere to be seen, but they'd left behind a trail of evidence. Although they weren't at home to be questioned, it wasn't long before the police tracked them down.
On Sunday the 26th, it was decided to arrest Stuart Royal.
Stuart Royal. On the floor!
He was located and taken out by armed officers and taken into custody. On the Monday, we managed to locate Lee Rusher and Jetmir Butchpapa in South London, and when they were arrested and brought back to Kent on suspicion of the robbery and the kidnapping.
As the 3 men were grilled, forensic results came back on the contents of Michelle Hogg's bin.
The latex was separated and it was examined, and so was some of the false hair that was in there and the other makeup parts. These are vital pieces of evidence. As we start to examine these, we get DNA hits. Those DNA hits belong to Lee Rusher.
Tests on the drinks can found at the farm also pointed to Rusher.
From that Red Bull can, we've got a DNA profile of Lee Rusher.
Forensic results were helping piece together this complex investigation.
Examination of the 2 vehicles found burning reveal that the Vectra has blue lights fitted and a siren fitted. This is our bogus police car. We know this. It also reveals that it's got some bullets in it, which are of a certain type of ammunition were used in Scorpion machine pistols.
After examining the contents retrieved from the red van, detectives uncovered more damning evidence.
The boxes turned out to be the boxes that held Holdalls. These holdalls were subsequently discovered to contain all the money that we discovered later on. The plastic that was found in the back turned out to be the plastic that was the shrink wrapping from the holdalls when they were inside the boxes. The paper towel, on that we found the shoe print of the Dixon's child.
The suspect linked to the van, Stuart Royal, was already in custody, with some serious questions to answer. Masses of evidence was being uncovered, but so far, more than £50 million was still missing. This changed when another tip-off led them to a location over 30 miles away.
We execute a warrant in Welling, South London, at a premises called E&R Cars. And in the corner of the compound is a container, like a lorry container. And having opened the doors, in there we discover £9,655,000, all in bags, Eagle and Monarch holdalls. Significance of those is they come shrink-wrapped in plastic bags and boxes that were found in the back of the red LDV Parcel Force van. All the money is still in Securitas wrappers, so it's easy to identify. Next to the doors of this is a boat called the Shaky Jakey, and there's also a white van. These are linked to a man called Roger Coots.
Coots was an old friend of Lee Murray and ran a garage in Welling. His vehicles were just inches from the loot stashed in the lockup. But it was another crucial piece of evidence that was about to plant him firmly at the scene of the crime. Kent police were in the midst of solving Britain's largest ever cash robbery.
This is organised crime at its top level. This is planned and executed with military precision.
Over £53 million had been stolen from a high-security cash depot. Within 5 days, officers had received intelligence leading them to vital evidence and key suspects. They'd arrested several men and discovered a wealth of incriminating clues. Now, one of their most wanted, Roger Coots, was linked to some of the most indisputable evidence so far.
It was his DNA we recovered from the cable ties used to bind all of the victims within the depot, a damning piece of evidence which he could never explain.
Coots was also an old friend of another suspect the police were keen to speak to, Paul Allen.
Paul Allen came from the South London area, although at the time was living in Chatham, Kent. He was involved in the cage fighting scene. He worked out with Lee Murray and really can be described as best of friends.
The police were still trying to locate Murray to help them with their inquiries. Coots and Allen were now prime suspects. Whilst the hunt continued, forensics uncovered more damning evidence.
When the cages were found at Frinningham Farm, CSIs located a piece of polythene. Forensic examination of that revealed that that polythene had Paul Allen's fingerprints on it. Further forensic examination told us that it was from the same batch of plastic that had been used to wrap the Eagle and the Monarch holdalls, which had contained the money when it was recovered. The next thing we find is we find his DNA on a cigarette butt at Michelle Hogg's house, another link in the conspiratorial chain.
Within days of the heist, Kent police had recovered over £10 million and had 4 suspects in custody, with another 3 in their sights. The gang had made a catalogue of errors, and yet another of their blunders led detectives to more of the missing millions.
And reported to the police that he'd been to a lock-up garage that he owned and rented out and had discovered bags in there. When we went to look at it, it was another £8.5 million of the haul, less than 3 miles from the depot had been stolen. Basically, it had been rented by a relative of Lee Rusher, and the rent hadn't been paid. The landlord went and opened it and found same holders that had been found in the LDV van, and they contained money still in Securitas wrappers.
Over £20 million of stolen money had been recovered, but a further £30 million was still missing. As the investigation continued, detectives were also trying to work out how the gang had so much information on the depot.
It was very clear from the start of this inquiry that the robbers had information about the workings of the depot. And so we thought there must be somebody working on the inside.
Kent police worked tirelessly to find any weak points in the depot's workforce. They could only come up with one name: Emir Husseini. Husseini was a close associate of one of the suspects, Jetmir Buchpapa. He'd only been employed at the security firm for a few months.
On one particular occasion, the 16th of January, he turned up at the depot 20 minutes early. He came in, and instead of going straight to the locker room, he went upstairs to the restrooms. He comes out, he walks down the corridor, and does what has been described as a pirouette. And he actually turns 360 degrees all the way around. A bizarre thing to do. By now, he's got his coat off, and you can see quite clearly he's got his shirt tucked really firmly inside his trousers, and there's a belt on his jeans. His actions are very robotic. He walks past the vault. He goes to the loading bay doors, and stands right in front of them. He goes to the airlocks where the money normally comes into the depot and stands right in front of them. And on one or two occasions, he actually looks down at his belt, and it's blatantly apparent that he's filming. He was remanded in custody, and we looked at him further with regards to telephones, and we found significant contact between him and Buchpapa using phones.
The phone records and security footage helped nail Husseini. The gang had preyed on his weakness to acquire inside information. Now their plot had been blown apart as officers unraveled their movements in the run-up to the heist.
The gang meet. Husseini must hand over what he's got from the footage. Husseini returns to the depot at 8 o'clock, as he normally would, having had his hour's lunch. His shirt is completely untucked and covering his jeans and the belt. Can't see anything. Much more relaxed, no more chin touching, no more looking at his belt. Carries on, goes about his daily business. The other conspirators then move from Tunbridge Wells towards Maidstone. All of this gang, on the 16th of January, around 8 o'clock in the evening to 10 o'clock, start to converge the home of Stuart Royal. For these 2 hours following their arrival, the phones do not contact anybody. Not just each other, they don't contact anybody. What are they doing? We don't actually know what they were doing, but we can surely guess they were looking at the footage of the depot.
As well as secretly filming inside the depot, evidence seized at the house of Lee Rusher showed the gang had filmed at another location.
An MP4 player we found in Lee Rusher's house had footage on it. It was clearly a reconnaissance of the Dixons' home address. A female walks up and knocks on the Dixons' door, trying to get Mrs. Dixon to come to the door, but she doesn't.
She didn't answer. 3 times I knocked on the window as well. Didn't do too much because we want to be suspicious. Sorry.
The persons doing that reconnaissance were sat in a VW motor car. The VW motor car had a distinct split in the windscreen, and it had a satellite navigation system on it. And it also had, in the picture you could see, a notepad. Following the arrest of Jetmir Buchpapa, we seized his vehicle, which was a VW Golf, and that had a distinctive split in the windscreen. It had the satellite navigation system, and in that was a pad with the writing on, which could be seen clearly on the video. By examining the film, we could clearly hear the radio in the background. I recognised the voice and the channel as Invicta Radio, which is a local Kent radio station. And we went to Invicta Radio and said, "Do you know when you broadcast this?" And they said, "We only ever broadcast that once, and that was at 5 o'clock on the 31st of January 2006. Bingo. We had the exact time of the reconnaissance.
And evidence that emerged from Stuart Royal's house put him well and truly in the frame.
Computer seized from Royal's home. There was a link to a company that was a people finder. And what we could see from the history of that computer is that Stuart Royal had tried to find Colin Dixon.
Mobile phone evidence gave the police a clear picture of the gang's movements in the lead-up to the heist.
The gang travelled to Chesterfield. They have a habit of calling at all hours of the day and night, and you can just see this phone pinging up the M1. They get to a shop that specialised in surveillance gear. They purchased a pinhole camera and an MP4 player. That MP4 player turned out to be the one we found at Lee Rush's house. They asked the proprietor to fix the camera into a belt, and the belt was then fixed into some jeans. As far as the proprietor could remember, they were size 34. The significance of that is Emir Husseini was a 34-inch waist.
The gang didn't realize how easily they could be tracked through their mobiles. They had made one of their biggest mistakes during the robbery itself.
Foolishly, 2 phones they kept active at the time of the robbery. One of those is Stuart Royal's and one of those is Jetmir Butch-Papa's. And we could evidence that, which leads us to believe that they were the 2 men in the lorry that left the depot full of money.
In January 2008, almost 2 years after the robbery, some of the gang was sentenced.
Following a 7-month trial at the Old Bailey, Stuart Royal, Lee Rusher, Jetmir Butch-Papa and Emir Husseini and Roger Coots were all found guilty for their parts in a conspiracy to kidnap the Dixons, conspiracy to rob the Securitas depot, and conspiracy to possess firearms whilst committing those offences.
You kidnapped and held a family at gunpoint under the threat of lethal violence in order to get access to that depot.
In sentencing, the judge gave Rusher, Butch-Papa, Royal and Coots public protection orders, which are basically indeterminate sentences. They will go to prison because they are a danger to the public, and the tariff set on that was a minimum of 15 years. Emir Husseini was found to be the inside man, not one of the robbers, so therefore that no public protection sentence was given against him, but he was given a substantive sentence of 20 years imprisonment.
Officers, take them down.
Following the service of that sentence, he will be deported to Albania.
In a dramatic move during the trial, the force's first suspect, Michelle Hogg, turned from a defendant into a witness.
She offered to put names to the kidnappers, names to the robbers. She would name who had been made up by her. And I think it was probably unprecedented in British criminal history, but she walked from the dock across to the witness box and named those people at risk to herself.
It was a great success for Kent police, who'd captured most of the culprits and recovered nearly £23 million.
In a robbery of this magnitude, the amount of time that's gone on and a hard investigation, I don't realistically believe that this money is sitting there waiting to be discovered. I believe it's gone back into the system. I believe that it may be used for other criminality. But we are determined that we will pursue this.
Paul Allen and Lee Murray had fled to Morocco days after the robbery. Murray successfully claimed dual citizenship and couldn't be extradited back to the UK. He was later jailed in Morocco for 25 years for his part in the robbery. Paul Allen was also brought to justice. Officers managed to seize some of his assets and extradite him back to Britain to stand trial.
Paul Allen came back to this country on the 31st of January 2008, and he went to trial at the Old Bailey.
The jury was unable to reach a verdict in Allen's first trial. Before his retrial, he suddenly changed his plea.
Paul Allen pleaded guilty to the offences of conspiracy to rob, kidnap and possess firearms. He denied that he was actually a robber on the night.
It wasn't me.
But he did admit that he travelled to Morocco and that the premises that he'd purchased out there and the vehicles had been purchased with the proceeds of the robbery.
As the first and the only person so far to say, yes, the case the police have put forward is correct.
Alan was jailed for 18 years. Although over half the money has never been found, Britain's biggest ever cash robbery has largely been solved. It took just 7 men to steal over £53 million in cash.
All they want is the quick, easy money. They're not interested in anything else. I've never felt secure in work since. After the robbery, I had real vivid nightmares. It's something that would live with everybody for the rest of their lives, you know. To be confronted at work where you're supposed to feel safe by thugs with guns.
The twist in the tale was that this ambitious heist was attempted by people who'd never committed armed robbery before.
The people involved in this had no convictions for robbery, a history of robbery before, which makes it even more difficult. In other scenarios, you hear of robberies happening, and let's go and look for those who have a propensity to commit robbery. Well, this was the crime of all time. They knew it was very high stakes, but they went for it.
Perhaps it was their inexperience that led them to be caught so quickly. The 4th of April 1983 went down in British criminal history when a gang of armed robbers raided a high-security depot in London nicknamed Fort Knox.
At the time, it was the biggest cash robbery in this country.
This team were obviously regarded as being the top echelon of robbers.
The heist was executed with military precision. The robbers carefully planned their attack and fled without a trace.
It seemed to be completely devoid of any clues. They just seemed to have vanished with the money.
They held the guards captive for an agonizing 8 hours and then stole almost £7 million. But how did they do it? This is the unbelievable story of the Security Express heist. Easter Monday, April 1983. Security Supervisor Greg Council was starting his early morning shift at the Security Express depot in Shoreditch, London.
Greg Council was the controller for the day, and he came in to work very early, took over from the other controller. His job was to allow people to come into the secure part of the building, and generally he would sit there monitoring the cameras.
It was no normal day at the office. The bank holiday meant the depot was awash with cash as they waited for the banks to reopen the following day. Greg waited for the other guards to arrive before allocating the workload.
And it was on Easter Monday. There was a big prize there because of the Daily Mail exhibition at Earl's Court. That would bring in a lot of money every year.
So millions of pounds had to be handled that day. Each guard would be busy. As Greg waited for the first of the 7 men to arrive, he went about his usual routine.
At one stage, he got up to go and get the pint of milk that was just outside the back door near a place where the wheelie bins were stored.
It was a routine move that Greg did on most shifts, but it was about to change his life forever.
One of the guards used to come out of a morning to get his cuppa and go to the other control box where they had a trap in the wall. The milkman used to leave the bottles of milk But in doing so, he had to come out of the main building and switch all the security off and all the sensors. So there was the chink in the armour.
He just opened the back door, stretched out to get the pint of milk, and he was then pounced on by 6 people, all balaclavaed up.
Greg had no time to react. A gang of armed robbers pounced on him. He was led back into the depot at gunpoint and now feared for his life.
He was then taken back to the control room, where he was held for hours.
The security supervisor was ordered to sit back at his station and remain calm. He was still the only man on duty, but unbeknown to him, the armed gang had a detailed plan.
He was actually put by his desk, but 2 of the robbers hid themselves underneath his desk with a shotgun aimed at his crutch piece. And that's where he sat for a long while, letting his fellow colleagues come in one by one.
The pressure on Greg was immense. 7 other men were due on duty, and he knew that it took more than one guard to access the millions of pounds stored in the vaults. But so too did the robbers.
You got to get the guards to tell you exactly what's what, and what you open first or second or third, or what keys you put in, which way you turn them, panic buttons and alarm buttons.
And it appeared that the robbers even knew detailed knowledge of the premises, the security cautions they take, the locks, the keys.
He did a good job in a way, because he was told not to look up and not to see any faces, because if someone comes in the main entrance and they get a look, there was nothing to stop them running back out the door and raising the alarm. So that was a crucial moment. Everyone who walked through that door, which had to be monitored really exclusively. And poor old Greg had a shooter up his Niagaras, so he had to do as he's told, didn't he, you know?
Okay. Really, what made it even more devastating was the fact that they were there so long. Security guards were coming in every half an hour. They were confronted by a shotgun, and they were then put at the back, and it just seemed impossible that no one had noticed something untoward going on.
So the pressure was on. Guard after guard arrived for their shift, with Greg dutifully letting them in. The hours ticked by and the phones rang as usual. But remarkably, Greg managed to keep it together, despite being held at gunpoint.
Who's that? It's my wife.
And they were all laid down, they was all looked after. It was lunchtime, wasn't it? So that's been a long morning, you know, and the phones never stopped ringing.
Bye-bye.
The firm must have known that the time was running out.
The robbers laid in wait for over 7 hours, working with military precision. Each guard now lay helpless in the locker room. All but one man was accounted for, and he held the vital information they were after.
Jamie Alcott was the custodian with the keys. He had to take over the keys and know what to do with them, how to put the keys into the locks, and things like that.
But the last guard wasn't about to give up his information easily.
And one was the stubborn old boy who was being a bit clever. Of course, they had a little can of a lighter fluid. And he's told to behave himself, otherwise he's going to be set alight if he didn't tell the truth.
A gang of 6 armed robbers had burst into a Security Express depot in London, ready to steal millions of pounds. But it wasn't nicknamed Fort Knox for nothing. They controlled the building, but had to force every guard in there to cooperate in order to reach the money. And the last guard was going to be their biggest hurdle.
The robbers particularly wanted Jamie Alcock to come into the premises, although they had to wait for all the personnel to come in because they couldn't allow anyone to come in after they'd started removing the cash. But Alcock was the one they wanted because I think they had the information that he was the second key holder for that day. So therefore, they needed him to be there to give them the combination of the keys.
If he didn't tell the truth about where the keys were, the whole business is blown. It was a very touchy situation.
Time was running out. The robbers had been waiting for over 7 hours for the final guard to clock on. He was the only one who knew the whereabouts of the vault keys.
When they first asked Jamie Alcock to produce the second set of keys to open the vaults, he originally gave them a blank. It's not me, it's not me. And then the robbers got a little bit terse with him, and it then turned to extreme violent behaviour.
By this time, the gang was wound up. They had spent months crafting their plan. Now, one man was standing in their way.
So they got a can of petrol and started to pour it over him, and somebody produced a box of matches threatening to set him alight.
He knew where they were and he wouldn't say where they were, so that's why he had the treatment with the lighter fuel, you know. But he wasn't harmed, he wasn't hurt.
Well, of course, Mr. Alcock had no option then but to get the second set of keys, and at that particular stage, it was getting rather nasty.
Alcock was now badly shaken. He had been doused in petrol and terrorized. Although unharmed, he realized the robbers meant business. He had to cooperate. The gang now had all the pieces of the jigsaw. They grabbed a different guard, Alan Grimes, to put the final part of the plan into action. Their aim was to penetrate the highly secure vault, which could only be opened by a combination of keys and codes. Once inside, sealed bags were held in cages, and a further 7 safes housed even more money. But the thieves were running out of time.
They made him open up the vaults. I mean, security there was tremendous, but you had to have someone to do it, to open it up for him.
The pressure was now mounting. No vans had left the depot for over 8 hours. Phones were ringing off the hook with customers wondering where the guards were. All but one were bound and gagged in the depot. The robbers had limited time to get to the millions of pounds.
It's a long procession to get to the vaults themselves. Once they saw all those cages full up with plastic folders full of cash, you know, every cage is full up with money, and there was cage after cage of them. Between £6 and £7 million was cleared out. All that was left was silver, I think, at the end.
The firm wasted no time loading the contents of the vault into their waiting van. Nearly £7 million was removed in just 20 minutes.
Once you're in there, you're not going to run out and leave £200,000 or £300,000 in a bag. It's only a matter of throwing them on, isn't it? You've got to clear it out.
But as the van sped away, one gang member nearly blew their whole operation.
On the way out, one got nearly trapped in the door because the doors was closing on him, and he got stuck in just at the last moment. because they had to run across the yard from the box, press the button and then run and get out. Of course, the vans and the car had already gone, the van with the money, and they're just the car outside waiting for him.
And then there was silence. The guards were left bound and gagged. Millions of pounds had been stolen whilst they lay there helpless, and the police had no idea until one of the guards struggled free and raised the alarm.
When I actually got to the premises, there was at least 8 of the security staff. They were all in various places, being interviewed by officers. You could see various items, like stockings. The guards' helmets were left on the floor. And then when you went in the vaults, of course, there was turmoil there. The whole thing was just in chaos, really.
The highly organised gang wasted no time in fleeing to a secret location.
There's not many places you can drive a big vehicle in. There's too many nosy people around in town. It's got to be out in the sticks a little bit, where you can pull down a few lanes and then pull into somewhere where you've got no neighbours or something.
Police were now in a race against time to draw up a list of potential suspects.
I think from the outset we knew it was a real professional team, and probably an old-fashioned team, a mature team. They seemed to be well in control of the guards. They knew exactly what to do and say and how to frighten the guards into doing what they were told.
So professional was the gang that they left no way of tracing them at the scene. By the time the police were looking for clues, the thieves were tallying up their new fortune.
I was invited on board to help. The money went back to a barn where the money was laid out on trestles and divided up into different sections and parcels. Everyone was in charge of their own particular money, you know. It's very nice, but you couldn't even put anything in your pocket and take it home with you, could you, you know? Or go home and say, go out and buy yourself a new car. You have to keep very quiet about it, don't you? Very stum.
With the money in hand, the gang asked Freddie Foreman, a prominent member of the London underworld, on board to help handle the vast amount of cash. Meanwhile, the investigation quickly grew into one of Scotland Yard's largest ever. They needed results, and officers were desperate for clues.
There was immense pressure to capture these people, so much so that I think most of the members of the flying squad, and I think there was 80 plus, that were actually engaged on it right from the beginning. There was hardly anything left there at all. It seemed to be completely devoid of any clues. They just seemed to have vanished with the money.
And whilst officers were put on the back foot with no forensic leads at the depot, the cash was divided and taken deeper into the gang's network.
We were fortunate enough to have an office in the building where the money was kept. And had tea and sandwiches and counting machines and things. And of course, all marked money has to be disposed of if the bank staff have marked it in any particular way. So that can get you arrested and nicked later on, you know. So you have to go through it all, really, as best as you can.
As Foreman counted the cash, detectives started to pick up on other leads.
We were doing a bit of proactive policing, setting up surveillance points on various teams. One of the bits of information we had concerned a particular pub in Stoke Newington called the Albion. An informant had phoned us to say that people who were frequenting that were involved in the robbery. We had set up an observation point which lasted for months and months, and we did in fact see 3 or 4 people that were already in our system who had been put forward as potential suspects for the robbery.
The officers on the flying squad, they'd been there years. They knew the notable families in the East End or London, full stop, who would be capable of committing this type of robbery. We just put all the names in forward. We would go out and do work on them and come back and decide whether we actually went and did searches, arrested them, brought people in, did some interviews. But it was very difficult because the fact is that we had no evidence.
The flying squad were now on the trail of several suspects, but had little to go on other than their hunch. Meanwhile, Foreman was carefully making plans.
It's very difficult. I mean, if you've got a large amount of money, to leave it somewhere where you know it's going to be safe. I actually did have somewhere. I had a friend who was in the city, and he was in charge of an office block. It used to be a bank on the ground floor, so the basement still had the vaults and the safes, same as the Security Express in a sense, you know. So the money went from one vault to another vault for safety, and that was, it should have been left there, really, for indefinitely. It would have been a much better idea, I suppose.
The hunt for the missing millions was on. No forensic leads were coming from the depot. But how had the gang managed to break into the building?
I don't think any team of that quality would ever commit a robbery without detailed knowledge of the premises, the security cautions they take, the locks, the keys, and not many people apart from mid-management or higher would know all these details. There was absolutely no doubt in our minds that there was somebody very senior that had given this team inside information. And it appeared that the robbers even knew details of the families of these guards. So, you know, to know the whole outline, it appeared that there was somebody higher up than these guards.
But all inquiries on an inside man drew a blank. Months of surveillance on suspects were going cold with no new evidence. Meanwhile, Foreman was working hard not to change his lifestyle. Whilst his chunk of the money was stored safely, he went about his business as usual.
I was still living in the same flat. I had businesses, I had betting shops, I had casinos, I had pubs, clubs. I'm entitled to have a bit of cash, so I could account for quite a lot of it. My intentions were to live in Spain and America. When I went to America, I was nearing up a dollar millionaire.
But detectives were digging deeper for clues, so Foreman worked hard not to arouse suspicion.
So I never changed my lifestyle at all in London. I still had the same car. I had an Audi, I think, at the time, and someone had run into the back of me, and it was all bented and doubled up, and I thought, no, I won't get it fixed. I'll leave it like it is, you know.
While Foreman was keeping his head down, officers were getting closer to some of the other suspects. And this was about to pay off. Detectives finally got the breakthrough they desperately needed.
There was a wall with screws, and as we took the top half of the wall away, turned it round, there was some writing on it, and what it was figures, starting with £400,000. Behind the wall was 3 canvas sacks, and they were full of money, full of notes.
An armed gang of robbers had ambushed a Security Express depot and fled with millions of pounds. The thieves had left no forensic clues, and all police knew was that this was the biggest cash robbery ever to hit the UK. But now, after months of drawing blanks, their surveillance was about to pay off.
The initial breakthrough was when a vehicle was found in the East End, in Hackney, I believe it was. As a result of that, we went back over what we'd done in Hackney, and it was very, very close to a garage proprietor who we'd looked at and had been visited by people who we eventually arrested.
It didn't happen right away. It happened some months later when some fella, never met him, didn't know him, but a friend of John Knight's, I think it was. He was the one who sort of started the ball rolling.
The man in question was John Horsley, a garage owner who appeared to be well connected to the underworld.
I don't know exactly how it came about, but it wasn't anybody that I knew directly, you know, at the time.
His house was searched, and during the search of his house, he was found that he's financially, he wasn't very well off. In fact, he was in debt up to his eyeballs. Couldn't pay his gas, his electric. All of a sudden, he acquired a lot of money, paid his bills off, took his wife and family on holidays, all had cars and were living a life for Riley.
Police knew they were onto something. They put pressure on Horsley to explain his dramatic change in lifestyle.
Right from the outset, Horsley denied everything, but when officers were putting to him photographs, who he met, the days he met, the number of days he met people, the number of days he met these convicted robbers, it was then that he realised that the situation was very dire for him, and he more or less confessed everything.
He told us that his part of the robbery was that he'd been asked if there was anywhere he could give as a storage place. He offered his garage, which he owned, and the gentleman who asked him if he could have a storage place asked for both or all the keys that he had to the garage, and he said it would be well looked after for the use of the garage. He gave him 2 keys. The people went away. He then turned up when they asked him to help unload a van, which was full of very large canvas bags, which all went into Mr. Horsley's garage and was then locked, and away they went.
And the revelations weren't going to stop there. Horsley had snitched, but his further confessions were going to shock even the gang members.
Mr. Horsley, unfortunately, told a little lie. He still had 1 key. And that night he went back to the garage, went into it, opened some of his torn sacks and found they were all full of money. So in his own statement, he said he helped himself to a few £1,000 and away he went.
With Horsley now freely giving information, detectives pushed to find the new whereabouts of the cash. Searches on his garage revealed it was long gone from there.
Mr. Horsley then decided to tell us that he'd been asked to look after one of the robbers' share of the money, to count it, look after it, put it in a safe place so that it was available when he needed money. What he told us was that his father-in-law was an old age pensioner, and within his flat in a warden control place, he'd put a false wall that allegedly the father-in-law didn't know about, and behind that wall was 3 bags of money. So it was then that Mr. Wilton decided we would go out there and then and search his father-in-law's house. But we were told it would be money. We needed tools and bags to get the money. Turned up, went into an old age pensioner's flat. First thing we noticed was the pool table where Mr. Horsley said he'd counted the money on. And secondly, went into a room and there was a wall with screws freshly in it, which we undid. And as we took the top half of the wall away, turned it round, there was some writing on it, and what it was figures, starting with £400,000. And it was then like withdrawals that basically the gentleman who committed the robbery would take. Yeah. Behind the wall was 3 canvas sacks, and they were full of money, full of notes.
The interrogations didn't stop there. Horsley was a man at breaking point. But would he give up his all-important contacts?
Mr. Horsley, in his disclosure to us, had named the people who had turned up, or some of the people he knew. It was a massive breakthrough, and it was the start of the arrests of the main players within the robbery.
The police had their breakthrough. Horsley admitted his link with Billy Hickson, a local gangster with a string of convictions for robbery, and Terence Perkins, hard man from North London with 1 previous minor conviction. Both men were known to the police and potentially dangerous. But officers didn't stop there.
It was Mr. Perkins' money, which was behind the wall. The money was a large breakthrough because we had no evidence. We now have evidence of cash that came from that robbery.
They now had one suspect definitely linked with the cash found. But the firm were about to discover they had another supergrass amongst them.
Horsley mentioned another man who was on the periphery, a man called Opiola. We didn't know hardly anything about Mr. Opiola, but he gave us a bit of a clue.
The flying squad was on the verge of another massive breakthrough. Mr. Alan Opiola was to prove the next big chink in the robber's armor. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson wasted no time in bringing him in for questioning.
Our inquiries reveal that Mr. Opiola ran a garage that was owned by John Knight. So the information gathered momentum within, 4 or 5 days, and when we arrested Mr. Opiola, similarly to Horsley, he was just a minnow, and within a couple of days of being shown the fact that he had rented this van, he succumbed and he, in fact, became a supergrass. He told us so much that he became a very, very important witness.
Opiola's information revealed he'd been leaned on by his associate to help after the robbery.
And lo and behold, Mr. Opiola deposited £30,000 notes because he'd allowed his house to be used. He stated that his house had been used for 3 or 4 days to count the money from their bags, and it took him 3 or 4 days. His bedroom was used, his wife went and stayed with the mother-in-law.
Less than 24 hours after Opiola's revelations, flying squad officers turned up at the next suspect's house. John Knight, well known to the police and business partner of Opiola's. The informants had played right into the officers' hands. The police now had their men, but would the gang reveal all? The mystery of the largest cash robbery in London was about to be cracked by Scotland Yard. The flying squad had found nearly £400,000 of the missing millions, and their informants had revealed vital secrets. Now they had key suspects in their grasp, but would they give away any clues to the heist?
When we first arrested John Knight, at his home was found a list of building societies. During the next 24 hours, 48 hours, having visited all these branches, we realised that he'd been putting large amounts of cash into these building societies after the robbery.
They were arrested, the houses searched, certain items were found and brought in, and they were all interviewed. And from there they were kept in custody as a result of the evidence we then had.
Cracks were starting to show. The main suspects gave nothing away, but evidence was mounting. Foreman knew it was time to leave.
So I thought, well, the best thing is to get over to Spain and lay low and see how it develops and see what happens. That's what I did, that's when I left. But it was a bit ominous to leave on that particular day because that was obviously recorded and knew that I left on the day that Johnny Knight was arrested.
Despite the coincidence, Foreman jetted off to start a new life in Spain.
After 9 months out there, things seemed okay, and we felt pretty safe and secure. So I started lashing out a little bit and investing a little bit of money, and on a few apartments, which was used by family and friends most of the time.
And it didn't take long for officers to extend their search to foreign shores.
Right from the start, when these people were arrested, we realised that there were connections abroad, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland. We had evidence that they had accounts actually in Spain, Even while John Knight was in custody, there was efforts by him and his family to get a safe deposit box opened in Spain.
And I took off on several occasions, and I did every town in Spain and every coastal town or the whole perimeter. I mean, just for it to die down, but as soon as you came back, it was still going strong. The press, once the press get their teeth into it.
Detectives never gave up the hunt. It wasn't long before they were on Foreman's heels.
Freddie Foreman was part of the second wave of this inquiry with Ronnie Knight, John Mason, Everett. Freddie, in fact, goes back many years. When you think about the Crays, Jack the Hat, Ginger Marks, people like that, he has been in the top line of criminals in London for many, many years. We had information during the first year of our inquiry to do with Freddie Foreman, but we were so involved in preparing a case against the people we'd arrested that we had to shelve a lot of the inquiries because we just didn't have the personnel to do it. We knew he was in Spain. Spain were feeding us information of what was going on over there.
It was during inquiries in Spain regarding one of the suspects that officers stumbled across a link to Foreman.
My name never came into the frame until 9 months later when I was in Spain, when the police came to the Alcazaba and asked questions about John Knight. The manager there said, no, there's nobody by the name of John Knight's got an apartment here. So they got their papers together and put them back in their briefcase and got up to leave and got to the door. But Ronnie Knight, they said, has got an apartment here. And his big friend, Freddie. Oh, I said, has he? They came back and started the inquiry all over again.
Detectives may have got close to Foreman, but remarkably, it wasn't until 6 years later that a twist of fate brought them face to face. Little did Foreman know, British authorities had been working closely with the Spanish police to bring their suspect back to the UK.
As I was getting in the car, they pounced on me. They took me straight to Marbella police station, and they banged me up downstairs in a cage with a load of smackheads and different Moroccans and different nationalities. I said, I want my lawyer over here to just send over for my lawyer, because nobody knew they had me. And next thing I knew, I was in the car, handcuffed, racing along the carretera 90 miles an hour, and I know where we're going, to the airport. We go straight on the tarmac. We don't go through the airport terminal. Go straight on to where the plane's waiting to taxi off. But it was empty. There was no one else on it. I broke away from them and I went into the terminal over the barrier, and all the people were queuing up waiting to come on board. I thought the more I kicked off, the more commotion I caused, they wouldn't put me on the plane, you know? They got me up the flight of stairs and I put my foot in the side of the staircase, and we all went down. Eventually they got me onto the plane and threw me down. And one of the stewards, a fella, came over and said, Mr. Foreman, he said, it's very hot, you must be thirsty, have a drink. And I lifted my head up, that's very kind of you, you know. And he had a beaker and he tipped it up and I swallowed it all down. And as soon as I swallowed it, I knew that, because there's a bitter taste. I felt myself being carried to one of the seats. They actually woke me up, because I was still spark out, as I saw the robbery squad coming down the plane and arrested me.
Along with the previous suspects, police now had Foreman. But getting any new information would be hard. And he wasn't about to lead them to any of the cash.
If you've got anything on me, then you show me the evidence.
We recovered a lot of cash at a relative of Mr. Horsley, But in most cases, the robbers had bought property, put money in banks. So that is why we got several officers from the fraud squad to assist us, because it seemed more of a financial case than it was any other form of evidence. But of course, the thing that let the robbers down mostly was the fact that one minute they were penniless, and from April the 4th of 1983, they had vast amounts of money. So, you know, it just seemed so obvious that they were engaged in this particular robbery.
It was only 360,000 they traced that had been transferred from different banks, from different places, and they could prove that. But I had businesses, so I could account for quite a lot of it.
The gang were on borrowed time. It had taken years, but Scotland Yard were finally piecing together their evidence through bank account details. But how the gang managed to infiltrate a top security depot remained a mystery until sometime later.
Apparently, it wouldn't have happened without the office. The office across the alleyway at the side of the building was really the important reason why you could observe and spot this little chink in the armour, this floor. There's always a lot of involvement, there's a lot of work has to be done. Right the way through the night, sleeping bags, flasks and binoculars and everything to get every little detail, you know, and the angle of the cameras and things like that. Where do you think is a blind spot?
Camera on each corner, mate.
It's not like in the movies when they come all dressed in black like ninja turtle things and they're throwing grappling hooks over the wall and scrambling up. I think they were all a bit too old for all that. So it's just to ladder up the wall and a ladder to go down the other side. And they was all taken away in the van afterwards, apparently. I don't expect any one of the firm would have thought that they would have been there for over 12 hours on the robbery, because it started at 12 o'clock on the night, got to 3 o'clock when it was able to go over the wall when it was quiet, to hole up there and wait until the morning when the first guard came on duty.
After years of detective work, officers finally had evidence linking most of the suspects to the robbery.
The trial was regarded as very serious. The magnitude of the robbery and the robbers concerned was such that they were escorted to the court every single day of the trial. 2 of the robbers got 22 years. That was John Knight and Terence Perkins. They were found guilty of the robbery. Billy Hickson actually was acquitted of the robbery and was sentenced to 6 years for handling stolen goods. James Knight was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for handling a substantial sum of the cash. Ronnie Knight was in fact sentenced to 8 years when he surrendered and actually flew over here.
Jury finds you guilty of the robbery of £6 million.
The 2 informants also received time for their part in the robbery. John Horsley was given 8 years, and Alan Opiola 3, both for handling the money. As for Foreman, his trial was high profile and well publicized.
The prisoners were brought to the court under heavy escort every single day, and the jurors were in fact given police protection throughout the trial. That's how serious it was regarded, and that's how serious the gang involved were.
Well, I didn't expect to get guilty of anything. You'd find you guilty of handling, you know. 9 years. I had to serve 6 years of that, you know.
I think in all, 5 of 6 of the main robbers were sentenced to some term of imprisonment.
The hunt for the missing loot was over. Scotland Yard had managed to cage a number of top London gangsters, but how much of the £6.5 million was ever recovered?
We recovered certain amounts of cash, but the inquiry then was taken over by insurance companies, and they retrieved large amounts through the houses belonging to the robbers, houses they bought in Spain, Portugal and other places. All in all, I believe that nearly £3 million was recovered.
It was one of the first cases of criminal bankruptcy where the insurance company then decided to go after the people who'd been convicted and seize their assets.
This was a robbery that shook London. It took the authorities over 7 years to recover less than half the cash. The whereabouts of the rest of the money remains a mystery. But despite the gang's planning and skill, most were brought to justice.
There is no doubt that the guards on that day had been put through sheer hell, because the fact that they had been held in the premises by these robbers for so long must have caused them great anxiety.
All the guards suffered trauma, but went on to recover from their ordeal over time. Despite initial suspicions, no Security Express employee has ever been linked with the robbery.
The gang were big, hard men because they lived in an area where they had to be, and they were respected in that way by other villains. People would not mess with them because of their notoriety.
I did have sort of two lives. I had the respectable businessman with the pubs and the betting shops and the casino and the nightclubs. And then there was the other side, the darker side. The pressure on my family was immense. For long periods away from home, in prison, you know, it's a long time out of anybody's life. There's quite a number of things in life which I regret doing, definitely.
Foreman spent many years behind bars, but it hasn't changed his outlook on life.
I don't really feel guilty about anything I did. I felt justified in what I'd done. But it was all survival. It's survival of the fittest. It's a dog-eat-dog world, the criminal world. But, you know, that's life.